Hello, everybody. Today is another day of Awaken Your Relationships. And I am Julie Murphy. And we are here every Thursday morning, Rita and I, to help you along in your relationships in life because God knows it's all right in our face these days.
Right in our face these days. There's no escaping our relationships.
No, Rita, and tell everybody who you are.
I'm Rita Hickman. I'm a body-mind expert and a shiatsu massage therapist, but I specialize in taking all that great body-mind information and how our subconscious works and our nervous system works and helping women get past any trauma that they have and get out of toxic and narcissistic relationships. And then even after the divorce, I'm working more and more with women who are 1, 2, 3 years after they've gotten divorced, who realize that the divorce wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And that they still, they're finding that the trauma that they carry from the relationship is still negatively impacting all areas of their life.
Yeah. And, I don't know about you, but these days I am seeing so many people pressed to the nth degree. All you have to do is look even on social media and how people with whatever opinion and whatever, thing is important to you, that when we have, one of the things that you've taught me is we can very easily have this hyper reactive nervous system. And that is a really big sign that it really actually doesn't have to do with the thing that's poking your buttons on Facebook at this point, but it's actually about some other trauma from your past that, like me, I didn't really know what my trauma was from my past, and I'll openly talk about it. Like, I had no idea because I had so much buried in my mind that a Catholic priest sexually molested me in my parents' house when I was like 5 years old. I had no memory of that until I did my work. But what I did know is I was getting a hyper-reactive nervous system. Like, there are signs that something's going on. And the question is what is it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important for people to recognize that you've got something going on, and what's this hyperreactivity, and making sure that, we're hitting it at the core. Last week, Rita, you really, it was really interesting. Like, despite the fact that I'm sitting here teaching with you now, you are still a teacher of mine when it comes to this area of my life, because last week, I thought I had gone down a path that was really good, but it was really still just a distraction for me actually just getting to the resolution. And you had said to me earlier today about, well, there's a lot of spiritual bypassing going on. So I'd love for you just to share some of that with people, because I think it's so important that, gosh, it's really time for us to be okay with having our opinion, but reduce our hyper reactive nervous systems and come from a place of having your opinion, but do it with a whole different level of calmness.
Right. And that's, I first started to think about the idea of spiritual bypass, and it's a term that came from a friend of mine, 𝘰𝐼𝐾𝐿, because I was involved in a lot of different spiritual practices, Native American practices, and New Agey stuff and Asian medicine. And I found over and over and over that specifically the men who tended to be leaders in these sorts of things, Wayne Dyer, Hay House, all that stuff. Michael Beckwith, we all have these men who are telling women what to do, which really pisses me off. So a lot of the personal growth, self-help stuff, they target women, and it's men mansplaining to women again how to be happy. Unfortunately,
like priests in the Catholic Church telling you how to behave when they're blessing everybody.
Yes, no kidding. So what would happen is these people who had ascended to these positions of great spiritual authority were jerks. They would minimize people or belittle people, or they'd get angry very quickly, or they'd, swear at their dog, or they'd make fun of their grandkids, and, or they still had all of these other problems because they immediately, one of the 5 stress patterns we've talked about is we've got disassociation, we've got people pleasing, we've got endurance where you just put your head down, keep going. We've got anger, and we've got rigidity in thinking. And so what would happen is these spiritual leaders were living often in their stress pattern, always sort of under the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were very clear in what was right and what was wrong. You know, they were very clear on how life should be and weren't open really to other ideas. And so there was a lot of toxicity, a lot of abuse in those high levels, not because these people didn't know what they were talking about, but because they did a spiritual bypass. What they did is, instead of gaining the knowledge through experience, they instead read a lot of different works and, you know, thought about it a lot. And this is what they came up with.
Right.
The problem is men who have done spiritual bypasses and who are in leaders in personal development for women especially, their model is now based upon reality, not anything that's real. It's based on what men need to do more in life, which is to be more flexible, more open-minded, more compassionate. But they were giving this advice to women, and women were like, yes, we need to be more compassionate. So compassionate that you end up being manipulated and used, and in relationships with people who have, you know, no values or ethics, or are constantly triggered.
Right.
Because we're taught to disempower ourselves by people who don't know what they're talking about, because
Totally.
they didn't do their work in the first place.
Right.
And it reminds me of, so in the last few years, they've been going around the world and doing brain scans of people from all sorts of cultures and beliefs and ideas.
Yep.
And what they discovered was everybody's brain was widely different, because they were shaped so very differently by their culture and their experiences, that an Indian, you know, living in a caste system in India has a way different brain than the white college student that they did all the brain testing on, who was male, you know, in the first place. So here's
Right.
this disconnect of personal growth, men saying you need to be more like men, and without actually reclaiming their feminine side, and then using that position as a place of abuse, instead of women recognizing that the problem isn't that we're not nice enough or not flexible enough. It's that we've been so traumatized by being told to shut up, to stay in our place, to keep down, to be more flexible, to help the ego or identity of the men in our culture, that we're playing a role. I'm recognizing more and more.
Can we talk about that? So
Yeah.
I have said to women going, yes, the other parties have not done their part well, whether, you know, typically the man, but
yeah,
I continually tell women, you're part of the problem because you're playing the
Yes.
role.
You're playing
Like,
the role.
And I'm not blaming women. Like, I don't want to get into that whole thing, but I want women to really hear that you have got to choose to stop playing that role. You have got to choose to start to be more empowered, and not empowered to the point that you become the bitch, right? Like, come empowered to just have your voice. Like, you know, there's been multiple times, you know, in my house, that is what my mom did a lot. My mom, you know, got quiet and just went to her corner. And then years later, she became like the yeller, you know, and it's just because she finally wanted her voice to be heard. And then I know in that generation, a lot of people felt that. And so a lot of women who are in their working years today don't necessarily have role models that did it in a way where you came from a place of empowerment. Instead, you were supposed to be the pretty arm candy. That was our role models. And so we as women have got to start to actually choose to play a different role, to be in a different place. So I just really wanted to echo that, because it's never just one side. You know, it's both parties are choosing, whether it's a codependency or whether, however it is that you're doing the dance, like you've chose to do that dance. Like right now, I pay a ton of alimony every month that still creates suffering cycle for me because I chose to play that role for 15 years. And that was very sobering when I finally realized what part my participation in all of that was.
Yeah, but it's so empowering, because the only way you can create change is by looking at reality the way that it is and then looking at the things which you are responsible for and can control, and then doing something about that, and doing it not from a place of trauma. And this is where most women trip up, because they're so traumatized that they're in a place of fight or flight most of the time. And so when you react, when you have a trigger, you can't stop it. There's no stopping it. It's automatic.
Yes, that is true, because it just goes. And then it's like what I call in the money world, I call it like in January, like you have a spending hangover after the holidays, you know, because you have this credit card bill and you're like, oh, what did I just do? But our nervous system is the exact same thing when we are in our trigger. Like afterwards, you sit there and you go, what did I just do?
Happened?
Because I don't know who that was, but I'm sitting here in the ripple effect of what I just triggered, right? And I think that's a really, really important point for people to understand.
Right, because one of the ways, you know, we've talked about stress patterns, and one of the stress patterns we've talked about is disassociation. And personally, I think everybody disassociates for a bit when they trigger. They lose time. They are not present and in their body, and they can't even remember half of what was said or what they did, because they were in this dissociative stress response fugue state. And so, yeah, we have to recognize that we're being triggered, and then find new ways to deal with those triggers. And it doesn't have to be with being a better person. It's actually about learning how your body works and learning how to regulate your nervous system and doing the things. But what happens when we become that crazy person, there's all this shame and guilt around it. I can't believe I was like that. Then there's the repercussions, you know, because you yelled, then now everybody, you know, it's all your fault. I mean, it's a weird.
Well, and I remember, you know, I'm a big believer in sharing my own story so people can learn. So I remember after my youngest was born, and I was pressed to a point that I went to a place of rage, and I was triggered, and I was like, that is not who I am. And that's when I started to realize something's not right, because that's not who I am, and that's not who I've ever been, and I don't want to be that person. So what is it that I needed to address? And I really, at that juncture, had no idea what I needed to address was to walk out of my marriage. And I had no clue that that's what it was, because there were parts of what was going on there that had to do with my initial trauma from my childhood of what I experienced with the Catholic priest. And so it was like, wow. And it was all the emotional stuff that was happening. It wasn't, you know, there was nothing physically bad going on in my marriage, none of that, but it was the emotional patterning that was in a response system of how I was interfacing in a world that I had no idea that patterned when I was 5 years old. No idea. And so, you know, we tried to work through it. We tried, and really, we found out they were just two different people who wanted two different things. Once I started to realize that I didn't want to play this role anymore that I had been playing for 15 years. And that was something that I chose I didn't want to do. And I continue to hold the space going, it's okay that we chose different paths. Like there's nothing wrong with that, you know, but most Catholic upbringings was shame on you if you get divorced. Shame on you if you break up a marriage. My dad to this day still says, was he really that bad, Jewel, that you had to leave? And I'm like,
is my happiness really that unimportant to you that you wanted me to stay?
And I'm my dad's favorite. My dad loves the shit out of me.
So this is something I've noticed lately. I'm in some high level coaching programs and mastermind groups. And one of the mastermind groups I'm in, I'm like one of 4 or 5 women out of 16 or 17 people. And sometimes I'll say things, and they're very from a feminine perspective, not girly, but more of the thoughtful, introspective, less hard facts and figures, you know, more like, hey, let's look at this from a more integrative way. And almost every time I say something like that, It falls on the floor, rolls under the table into the dust, and everybody pretends I didn't say anything. And it's because there's this idea that men have that women, they only see women as a metaphor. They're not actually recognizing that women are fully whole creatures and humans and have desires and things to go. But there's this idea or this system that women are only an inch deep. You know, that's the role we're asked to play,
Right.
is to patronize this patriarchal system by minimizing ourselves until you get to the point where you're so traumatized over and over and over. You have so many suppressed memories that you trigger and you can't help yourself, and you trigger about everything. And
Right.
And if you don't learn to get rid of those trauma triggers in your body, and it doesn't have to be with being a nicer person, it has to do with physically working with your body.
Well, and that's one of the things that you've also taught me, is that this is the key that another piece I want people to hear, is that you can get rid of the trauma triggers.
Yes. It doesn't just keep getting worse.
No,
things only keep getting worse if you don't deal with the stuff that you have.
Exactly. And you know what, again, this is why I always say we work things out or we act it out, and we do it through our money, our health, or our relationships. And even if it's money, like if you don't eventually address your spending stuff, you know, your debt goes higher and higher and higher, and it amplifies, and eventually the whole tower of cards, as you say, crumbles. Like it just falls down because it wasn't built on any solid foundation. And that is true with what you just said, like that the the triggers keep getting more significant and bigger, and you create, and in the end, why this is all tied to our health is that it all then just destructs your own personal health.
It does.
That's
when you start looking, if you start looking at emotions on a physical level, not just some weird airy fairy level, if you start realizing, oh, this is a trigger in my brain that's being activated by my amygdala. Some people's amygdalas aren't as fully developed, so they're not as strong. And this causes a reaction in my nervous system, which makes my heart rate go up, my blood pressure change, more blood goes to the skin, blood vessels narrow, your heart has to work harder. Any blockages that you have in your body, you can now feel because your body's trying to amp up its circulation, and you've got all these physical blocks. So if you're in a place of fight or flight all the time, your body just can't survive it.
And we don't even realize we're in that fight or flight.
Right. You know? We just think we're angry or it's somebody else's fault. That's the big one. When people get angry. So here's some science behind this, which we haven't talked about before. So you might find this interesting.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, okay. About 50% of the population, their energy system is self-contained. You know, it's not designed to loop with someone else's. The other 50% of the population, our energy is designed to hook into other people's and to circulate between the two or more people. It's like we've got hookups or outlets.
Yeah.
When we were babies and we couldn't regulate our own nervous system, our mothers or our caregivers would regulate our nervous system for us by calming themselves down or being calm. It would calm us down. So the thing is if we never learn how to calm ourselves down, we stay in the pattern of thinking that it's somebody else's fault that we're upset, instead of addressing the real problem, which is there is something inside your body that when you address it in the correct way, which doesn't involve years and years of therapy, it involves working on the body and the nervous system. When you clear those things out of the way, your body can finally heal itself. But you have to take the time to keep processing through all the bookmarks that your brain put in there. Because every time something happens that we can't handle and we suppress, our brain puts a little bookmark in and says, we need to come back to this and read this chapter. And if you don't go back, if you don't go back and have the experience in a safe way, then it'll keep.
Well, and I remember as I was going through the process of where I thought I was probably going to wind up down the divorce path, that I was like going, because I know sadness, a more amplified version of that is anger, and then a more amplified version of that was rage. So I was literally walking around my house going, why am I sad? Why am I sad? And what I came to realize, I was really sad that I was in the kind of relationship I was in. And I didn't even recognize that for a long time. I actually felt the feelings of the sadness because I would just then openly start crying, you know, as I would ask that question before I even actually mentally knew what those feelings were about. I figured that out, you know, when I realized that, you know, Julie doesn't fail at anything. And on some level, I felt like I failed at my marriage. And I was really sad about that. And because I've conquered and accomplished everything I've set out to do in my life, every single thing. I'm not a person that fails at anything. I always find a way. And that was a very sobering moment. And so I think it's important, like, to understand that we really do have to feel those feelings, especially, you know, I tell that to people who carry extra weight on their body. Like, all that is it's just like clutter in your closets. It's unprocessed emotions. And those unprocessed emotions represent whatever your unmet needs were in that moment of whatever it is that happened in your life. And so many of us don't even realize that. And it's like, yeah, the only way out is to feel the feelings.
Well, and most people think that you have to go through your story 1.5 million times. You know, I've been through therapy for 20 years or so. And every time you meet somebody new, you're like, oh God, I have to go through my story again. The problem is going back through your story over and over and over and over with people, it cements it more into your head. What we need to do is stop continuing to tell our story to therapists or anybody else. And just when we start to trigger, interrupt the trigger. And then what happens is we get the understanding and the insight on the other side. We're trying to understand what's going on while we're still in a place of fight or flight. But when you get that veil down, when you get that emotion out of the way by interrupting your nervous system, your subconscious has been gathering information. You're a freaking genius in your head. You've been studying this and researching this and going to classes and doing weekend workshops. And your brain has those answers. It's been creating them.
Totally.
But the only thing that gets in the way is this nervous system emotion piece. So telling your story over and over does not get you anywhere. What gets you somewhere is when you are stressing out, you do something intentionally in order to regulate your nervous system. And there's thousands of ways to do that. And then on the other side, you get the insight. It's like when people are mad, they go for a walk, and when they come back from the walk, it's all figured out. Same thing.
Well, I think that's what's been the most challenging for so many people, because we've been quarantined inside our house because we have a way that we distract ourselves. We distract ourselves by communicating our story to 10 different people, you know, or continuing to repeat it to solidify it more in our systems, and all that does is repeat your suffering cycles.
Yeah, it keeps you trapped.
Yeah, and it's like a hamster on its wheel in the cage, right? And it's like we have been forced with the shelter at home stuff and the quarantine stuff to really actually, the distractions. I think the reason it's all blowing up on social media with people these days is because you can't really blow up anywhere else. You can't go drinking in the bars. You can't go to restaurants. You can't, like, there's all the other things that we have, you know, put ourselves out there, you know, that those are the things that we're having to actually now go inside. Have to actually face what are those triggers, what's going on with the fight or flight, and get to the other side. And it's funny, like, I have taught so many people now. You've taught me havening, right?
Oh yeah, I'm glad you're teaching it to everybody.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, I'm going to reiterate it again. So on a scale from 1 to 10, Rita's taught me where is your trigger. So a lot of times when I'm triggered, I'm somewhere between an 8 to a 10. And then there's, you want to integrate your right and your left brain and align with your heart meridian is what this does. So you just go down your arms 20 times. And then after you're done doing that 20 times, on a scale from 1 to 10, how much are you triggered? the other day I had a very slight trigger going on, and my boyfriend says to me, he goes, so how you doing?
How you doing? Let's do the Havening together. Isn't it funny? Yes,
Like,
once people get tools, they're like, I think you need to calm down.
And then I just started doing, he goes, 4, 5.
Wonderful.
And that's beautiful, because it's like, the question is when am I triggered? When is he triggered? When are our kids triggered? I mean, we have 6 kids amongst the 2 of us, so it gets a little hectic sometimes.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that this tool, there's little tools, so the viewers can stop recreating the story and stop solidifying the story. That havening is something super easy to do, and it completely gets you out of your trigger. I did it with,
and I do it in the middle of arguments. If I'm in the middle of someone being aggressive towards me, I'll say, please keep talking. However, I'm being triggered. And so while you're talking, I'm going to do this. You know, I don't care what you think about it. And it allows me to authentically express my emotion instead of come out of a fight or flight place.
Right.
And when I authentically express the emotion that their behavior has triggered in me, that's how you get rid of the trauma trigger.
And what I like to tell people is that they don't realize that. So on a soul level, I truly believe that we call these people into our lives to practice what we're supposed to shift in our lives. You know, I am so grateful for my ex-husband, because I'm like, he is catapulting me into my greatness. And it's been a tough road for both of us. But I am so much better off because of everything that we've gone through. And I'll be forever grateful for that. So we have to understand that we have called these other souls into our lives to help us get to this next place of our own personal evolution. And the universe will test you, right? The universe will give you the temptation of more triggers. The question is, are you going to play the game and keep telling the stories, or are you going to actually shift it? You know,
and do something different.
Yeah. And it's super important, you know, and I'm just such a believer that we have to keep sharing these kind of things right now, because, you know, based on the astrological charts, and I don't know how many people follow that out there, and I'm not a huge person, but I'm enough to go, wow, this is really intriguing. This chaotic stuff is not going to stop anytime soon. And it's going to keep unpacking, because we all have to unpack the traumas and everything that we're holding on to, which is
it's gotten to a crisis point.
And we've got a lot of infrastructure change coming around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world. And it's going to hit us all. So I think the things, Rita, that you teach people are so critical,
and they're cutting edge. Here's the thing. I got this today from you know, I have a new client in Australia, and one of the things we were talking about, she says, I don't think anybody's doing the work that you do in Australia. So in the whole country of Australia, no one is doing nervous system work. And the reason being is because this is, I know,
somebody in Australia. Amazing.
It's because working with the nervous system to heal trauma is recent cutting edge technology that has its roots in indigenous cultures that have been doing healing practices for thousands of years. So, you know, I studied the indigenous practices, and there were all these really powerful ways and tools, but nobody knew what they meant. You know, oh, I channeled it from white buffalo calf woman, and, you know, oh, I got it from a dream, and they're very rigid in the rules. And scientists say, well, this is how it works. This is what happens when you do it. And this is how you can recreate it without having to create a big drama, where you can do what a ceremony does while you're in the middle of an argument and crying and your nose is all slobbery and, you know, and you're blowing you can stay there and be present and do that. In fact, the best healing happens when you are triggered to your highest level. So many times when we want to do a healing, we try to go a little bit for the negative. Yeah, let's dive into this. What do you hate? What's making you so hurt and angry and pissed off? Because what happens is it allows you to have access deeper and deeper to where the roots of your trauma are. And just flipping the switch on your nervous system while you're in the middle of a reaction is what
Right.
physically heals it.
Totally. Makes total sense. And, you know,
Mhm.
I want people to realize that there's so much that is daunting out there right now.
Yeah.
That one of the things that's been important to me is I've been creating this awakening series, because I have the Awaken Your Health on Monday nights, Awaken Your Relationships here on Thursdays. And on Tuesdays, we're going to start up Awakening Your Spirit to do some energy work around it all.
Yes, beautiful.
Yeah, and obviously I do money for a living, so Awakening Your Wealth, that's my book, right? So I started this whole awakening series because it doesn't have to be hard.
Right.
But
It
I
doesn't
have
have to be
come
so
to
hard.
learn in all these areas is that it can actually be simple.
Yes.
But when we try to solve it from our egoic minds and our brains, we make it hard. Like, oh my God, 10 years of psychotherapy. I'll never forget the time that I was sitting at a symposium with Deepak Chopra and the brightest PhDs around the world. And this one guy stood up there and he said, he was from overseas, and he goes, you know, we've realized in quantum physics that you can do, if you work with a practitioner that does holographic repatterning, which at that juncture, I had been doing that for 6 years. I didn't know why it worked. I just knew that it worked. And it's my friend Ann Emerson in Sedona who does this work. And you can get over something in 30 seconds that took you 10 years in traditional psychotherapy. That the
and I'm agreeing with that. Yes.
And if people don't believe me, this is how our cell phones work. Our cell phones work in quantum physics, and so do our physical bodies.
Yes.
And this is why it does not have to be hard.
Yes.
It does not have to be this daunting process of years and years of, you know, if you want to get over something, you know, in a couple sessions, like Rita, I can't believe how fast I got the people are asking me all the time, how did you get divorced? The economy's down. Your business is being challenged, which it actually isn't. I'm actually thriving, but that's people's perceptions. Homeschooling 4 kids, you know, because school got shut down, as well as, you know, I've been losing weight and everything else. And I'm going, well, because I'm just choosing the easy path to get past my stuff. And I'm working with people like yourself and my friend Ann Emerson in Sedona. I'm doing, because you have to me, the reason why the nervous system is the key is because that's actually our energetic sparks as human beings. And, you know, the work I did with 𝘾𝐻𝐸𝐸 through the years, he said that medical science will actually realize in 300 years that every single disease stems from the spinal cord.
I would completely agree with that.
And I'm like sitting here going, well, there you have it. It's yoga, everybody. I'm like, because that's the alignment of the spine.
Yes. Well, and here's the thing that I got into a discussion with another coach the other day. And it was, you know, he has this coaching model of, well, you do this, the information stays the same, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, you know, almost like a building block. And one of the things I learned through body work is that the body isn't designed like a pyramid. It's not designed with one layer and then another. It's designed as a balance, counterbalance. So it supports itself. It actually kind of pulls itself up and pulls itself out. So when we think about the body, not as a building block, when we think of it as a dynamic organization, then it changes how we look at it. And when we do healing, we've been told we need to do this step, and then we need to do this step, and then we need to do this step. But in reality, it's the right tool at the right time, in the right way for you. And so no one can tell you what you personally need to do and the order you need to do it in. And if you do it in the wrong order, you're going to struggle. So you have to be dialed into your intuition, or have someone else, you know, dialed into your intuition into the situation, so that you can say, aha, it sounds like the opportunities available to you right now are to work on this piece. So let's work on this piece. So like the last 2 weeks, the opportunities are available for me to process. This is a big processing time for me. So
Right.
I'm taking a big chunk of time out and doing that.
Right.
But in 2-3 weeks, I'll be now working on the next piece that would come in order for me, that the universe agrees is an opportunity for me to work on this.
Well,
so we can't try to put everybody in a box.
Right. And I think the other piece is, I had a client say to me the other day, well, Julie, how do I know if I'm in my fear or actually that's my intuition?
Oh, you know.
well, and I know, and I'm like going, well, if you're pulling it up to your brain and if you're thinking about it, well, then that's not your intuition. Like
Right.
if you're weighing the odds, like, then that's the wrong answer. And I try to keep it really simple for people. I'm like, does it make you giggle? Does it make you laugh? Because if it makes you giggle and makes you laugh, then it's in alignment with your heart and soul. And again, it has to feel easy. The thing
has to feel easy and good.
We are not used to it being easy. We have to
weren't taught how to do these things.
And I think that's almost what the shelter at home stuff taught a lot of people too. It's that, gosh, you know what? I wasn't running around like a crazy person. I wasn't, doing all these things. I wasn't, life calmed down, life slowed down. I actually been enjoying, I've had more clients say, hey, I want to buy a lake house somewhere because we just escaped the big city and we went with our kids out in nature, and we actually wouldn't mind like if remote schooling wound up happening again, because we'll spend the next year in a lake house out in nature.
How awesome is that? Yeah, perfect.
I mean,
it's creating an environment that supports you.
Correct. And one that feels good, that there's not all this craziness going on. And so the path that makes your nervous system feel the most calm, the most balanced, and the one that makes you giggle, that's the right path. That, like, it is that simple, ladies and gentlemen. The thing is, we always think that there's something wrong with that it's easy. Like, what am I missing? What am I missing?
Right. Well, we've been scammed by a lot of people saying, oh yeah, it's no big deal, but they didn't give you the right tool in the right way at the right time for you.
Right.
So it wasn't easy. So I have another way to check in with whether something is intuitive or whether something is your stress pattern. So people who are good spellers tend to have a good felt sense. They can feel if the word is spelled right or not. So when you just know something, you just know it.
Right.
That's your intuition. If you're trying to figure it out, if you're worried about it, if you're anxious, if you're obsessing, if you're rigid in your thinking, if you're unsure, that's not your intuition.
Right.
Your intuition is your brain, your heart, and your gut connecting and communicating and saying, yes, you are in alignment. You will feel it. You will radiate it. Your aura will spread out. So it's not complicated to know whether you're being intuitive or not. And if you're not being intuitive, stop and do something to regulate your nervous system and process through something and then come back.
That's beautiful. That's absolutely
It's very simple. Very simple. I've been listening, here's a cool thing I've been doing lately. So being a musician and into the arts and sensuality and body work and everything like that, I've played with brainwave entrainment for a long time. I used to write and record meditations and I put brainwave entrainment underneath the surface. And it would say, oh, it's for creativity. Oh, it's for enlightenment. And I'd be like, okay, whatever, I'll give it a try. Yeah. What I've discovered is that different brainwave entrainments help you process through trauma. If you listen to the tone for the lambda brainwave state, it's actually a different brainwave state than any other brainwave states. So they didn't know that gamma and lambda brainwave states existed until they brought meditating Tibetan monks over and they put stuff all over their brain. And then they said, wait a second, we haven't seen these extra brainwave states. And it's because they were high meditators that did a lot of chanting, a lot of entrainment for their minds. So the lambda brainwave state is where a region near the center of your brain sends out signals into your brain. So usually when you're in a brainwave state and they put receptors on your head, it's very clear. Oh, it's here. Oh, it's here. The lambda brainwave state is the center radiating information out, and then the information bouncing around your brain and your skull and integrating things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an integration, a processing sound. So that's that flow state. When you're in the
Right.
flow state, you're probably in your lambda state. So when you listen to this tone, give yourself like an hour a day. That's what I've been doing. It allows you to process through whatever's going on in your life, the backlog of emotions that you have, or any new information that you picked up. Integrate it so that your triggers go away, so that you have a higher order of thinking. And if you want the easiest way, you take an hour and a half every day, lay down with a set of headphones on, listen to a lambda brainwave state, let yourself think and process through whatever you need to. And that's it. You don't have to do your story.
Right. Well, and I know that was, I found that back when I was giving childbirth, well, my pregnancy with my second, because I didn't want to have a C-section on the second one. I wanted to let go of my control patterns so I could let my body do what it was meant to do. And, and that's when, I found Kelly Howell was and she's still one of my favorites in terms of the brainwave stuff, to where it's like that desired outcome. And so I totally agree. It's about like calming the mind to then release whatever's blocking you to get to that next place.
It's kind of interesting because of the 5 stress patterns, people argue about which ones are the best without even realizing their stress patterns. So when you have somebody who's angry, they are righteously angry, they're deservedly angry, they're angry, and that state is the correct thing. But if somebody else is people pleasing, then they're wrong because you're supposed to be angry like me. When people are people pleasing, they're like, you're angry. You need to stop being angry. You need to be nicer. But the reality is all of these 5 stress patterns are stress patterns. None of them are good to be in unless you're being chased by a lion. None of them are good.
Patterns, right? Like
They're
it's
different
just how you're going to do it.
Same thing. And so you need to not do one of the stress patterns, and one is not better than the other. Disassociation is not better than people pleasing. It's not better than, putting your blinders on and working. It's not better than getting angry. It's your stress response, period. And so you need to disconnect your stress response and get back into your frontal lobe, your whole self, your parasympathetic nervous system, where then when someone's yelling at you, you can go, oh, interesting, tell me more. And you'll gather information so that you can problem solve rather than being triggered by someone else's emotion. And people's emotions are going off the charts these days. To be able to regulate yourself, you're going to walk into a room and be a genius because everybody else is going to be freaked out and you're the calm centered one that isn't getting, flustered. People will look at you as the natural leader in the room because that's what they do. The most calm person in the room is perceived as the leader.
Well, that was another thing I learned along the way. One of the best meditation teachers I know, his name is 𝙤𝙬𝙧. And, I've done I met him through the Chopra Center years ago. And, they would always teach that get to the place of being able to observe it, get to the place of being able to witness. And I was always like, what?
How the hell do you do that?
Yeah, it was like this thing that was so outside of myself because I was a doer. I was a pusher. I was
So you were in a stress pattern most of the time.
All the time.
Yes.
And what's even more interesting to me from a physical body perspective is like my spine started to arch forward. People always be like, why are you sticking your stomach out? I'm like, I'm not sticking my stomach out because I was literally pushing to accomplish and to get to places and to do. Julie has the capacity to do more than anyone else that you've ever met. But even my spine was starting to arch forward. And it's funny, I have a brother that's just like that too. And he's wired just like me. And I was like, no, Tim, I'm a couple of years older than you. You need to start pulling this backwards before, to this day, like I work on pulling my spine back into alignment because for so many years it was out of alignment because all my energy was pushing forward and my physical body actually followed suit.
Yes, yes, that's exactly what happens.
And that
when
was
you
my
change
stress response.
yourself, yeah, and when you start to change how you show up in the world, your body changes, and that can be uncomfortable, because if you were used to protecting yourself and now you're not in a space to protect, now you're exposing all your sexuality, all your vulnerable places, you're walking in the world, you know, open.
Yeah.
There's some adjustments that have to happen along the way.
Well, and I noticed
people
that
do
that's a
work.
pattern on my mom's side of the family, is that all of the women, their shoulders go up and their heart goes back, like they're protecting their heart,
Yeah.
and they all get a hunchback.
Yeah.
And I noticed that, I'm going, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Like, no.
Yes.
And then, but you're right, from a vulnerability standpoint, going, oh gosh, how do I now operate in the world now that I'm being
Right.
exposed and vulnerable?
Yeah.
Because our physical body, you know, you don't see it when you're younger, but as you continue these patterns in your stress responses, in your relationships, you realize that's why your physical body is doing what it's actually doing, because of your response to the traumas and the patterns that are wired. Again, I want people to know that you're not consciously doing this.
No, and it's not anybody's fault.
Right.
Nobody taught us this.
No. And nobody's really talking about it even today that
no
much.
one's talking about it. Yeah. And people didn't know about it. You know, a lot of these tools are kept with high level, expensive trauma therapies that are inaccessible. And I mean, this is the latest information, and it's been kept secret in a number of ways. And so, no, it's not in the general public. No one is talking about it. And indigenous medicines are hidden because of all the politics involved, and you're trying to steal our culture. And so no, there aren't a lot of people talking about this, but you'll hear more about it because it's fact-based, it's science-based, and it's so powerful.
Right. Yeah, it really is powerful. It's really quite amazing. And how, again, I just want people to recognize that if you've got a hyperreactive nervous system, how this is what is really impacting your relationships.
Yes,
because if you do you, the universe will take care of itself. So, I have lived this. It's like, as I have been doing my work and shifting myself, all of a sudden, everything around me is shifting because I'm not showing up in the world the same way. And so everything is shifting. But what's also been very interesting to me is how other people in your life were very comfortable with how you were in the world.
Yes. Because you were shallow, you were a metaphor, you weren't a real person.
Yeah, because then they could act out their traumas with you.
Yes.
And you played the role, and you didn't even realize this. You know, a good friend of mine, Paul Cooney, came in. I actually met him through work, and he came into my home. Gosh, this was maybe after my second or third kid was born, and he said, you know, Joel, I know you in business, and you're really different at home. Yeah. I go, what? No, I'm not. I'm the same person. He goes, no, at the risk of offending you, you're kind of submissive. I was like,
a lot of high-powered women are.
And that is never
an
adjective I would ever use to describe me. Ever.
Well, what happens is many of the high-achieving, successful women are high-achieving and successful because they're driven because of their childhood trauma, just because of it. And so narcissistic people or toxic people are attracted to people who are successful and moving forward. And then narcissists instinctively, they're very instinctive, I think. And because they want to protect themselves, they kind of ferret out the things which will push your buttons and keep them feeling in a position of authority or power over you. And so they find and draw in and romance successful women as a way to boost their own self-esteem. And then they suppress successful women and find all the buttons that take them back to when they were 12 or when they were 3. And then we behave in that way based on those experiences. And they do that purposefully. And so we're caught in this role. They don't do it necessarily consciously. It's
I don't think
it's how they protect themselves. but it doesn't make it any less true. They're
Right.
predators. And so they've found the way to keep you controlled, especially if you're a successful woman. I mean, think about what a power trip it is to be married to somebody who everybody admires, who has achieved so much, and they come home and you're able to get them to cry. And you're able to get them to, when you say jump, you say how high. You know,
Right.
they're able to do that because they know, they've ferreted out the things which will cause you to be destabilized.
Right.
So it's a whole, the narcissist codependent process is a whole process. It's not just it's a whole role playing from the past that women need to learn how to do differently. Otherwise, the world's going to continue going down a shithole.
Well, and that goes back to the fact that us women need to stand up and finally
Yes.
be who we are,
Yes.
and own who we are, so
Yes.
that everything can shift around us. Until
Yes.
we really decide to approach life from a place of empowerment.
Yes.
You know, in the money world, it shows up as, you know what, you do deserve to have a $10,000 raise and make exactly what a man makes. But my biggest thing that I've seen in the money world is the women don't ask for it, and
Yes.
they don't believe they deserve it. They think of all the reasons why they shouldn't
Yes.
have it. Whereas
Yes.
the men just walk in and go, whether they deserve it or don't deserve it,
Right.
they expect
Right.
it and they get it.
Yes.
But that's
Yes.
a female problem. That is
Yes.
not a male problem.
Exactly. Those are things we can learn from narcissistic men or more ego dominated men, is how do you get what you want? And maybe they do it in a way that's not attractive to us, but it
Right.
doesn't mean that the principle of it is wrong. And
Right.
so when we can look at the principle and filter it through us. So even my 350-pound Ojibwe mentor that would yell at his dog, and, you know, and even him, you know, you get to allow people to be human beings, to be whole human beings, to embrace all parts of you, and to realize maybe the messenger is still flawed, but the message is correct.
Yeah.
So take the message, don't have too many issues around the messenger, and figure out how to use it in your own life to get what you want.
Right. And even if it means, you know, like if the employer isn't giving you that raise or whatever, have the courage to leave. And trust that when you stop putting up with behaviors that don't serve you, all of a sudden the things you want start to show up for you.
Right.
But you
to get
have
rid
to
of
have
something.
the courage to take the step. Like, I can tell you, there has been plenty of things over the last couple of years where I've had the courage to just take that step forward, and all of a sudden it all aligned. It was like, whoop.
Yes.
But
yes.
it couldn't show up unless I took the step in the direction of what it was
Yes.
that I wanted to show up in my life.
Yes. And you were compassionate about it.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is women are filled with so much shame and guilt that they haven't achieved what they're supposed to achieve, and that they keep being manipulated at home, and this disconnect and this separation in themselves, that they don't, we get pushed to a wall, and then we act out like we're a cornered, you know, rescue dog, but we're just, we totally react, and then people don't handle it well because now we're over the top.
Right.
The thing we need to do is to start with compassion for ourselves, getting our self-care in, getting some new information, learning some new tools, integrating that stuff. And then when you're ready and you feel like you've got some power, then you can walk into your other relationships and start making changes. If we try to make those immediately, we're going to be slapped down, and we won't have the groundedness and support and resilience to make good choices that lead us in the right direction.
But I always say, meet yourself where you're at, and it's okay, because you're in the perfect spot for your own personal evolution. And it's the second step in what I call the pact process I walk people through in my book, is that you have to accept the reality. You have to accept the reality of what it is that has been created in your life thus far. And that acceptance and meeting yourself where you're at is such a key component, because that creates the space then for the next thing to open up.
Yes, exactly. You have to clean something out, and that creates a space for new opportunities to fill it. You get to change your path because you let go of the things that don't work.
Totally. Well, Rita, I have no idea how an hour goes by so fast in talking with you. And, you know, certainly much love to everybody out there, but you can find me and many other tools on my website, juliemurphy.com. Come join us on other Awakening series, Awaken Your Health on Monday nights. Awaken Your Spirit will start next Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Central. And of course, next Thursday, we'll be here for Awaken Your Relationships at 9 a.m. next Thursday. And Rita, how does everybody find you?
For the time being, you can find me at inspiremassage.com, or you can find me on Facebook, Rita Inspire with Rita Hickman. Look up Inspire and you'll be able to find it. But within a few weeks, I'm working on my new website, which is going to be a lot cleaner. And that's probably going to be ritahickmancoaching.com. So in the next few weeks, that'll be changing over. But right now, it's still inspiremassage.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Rita.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Julie.
Positive stuff out in the world.
We need it. We need it desperately.
Great stuff. Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Bye, guys.